Let's go!
Now that your thoughts have had time to stew, can you tell us what the smell of GG Strive is? And do you think more mature presentation of the game has had an impact on the entertainment of the intros? And do you think it'll affect the instant kills? Instant kills. Well, we don't even know if IKs are in the game yet, right? We don't even know if the game actually has IKs. A game late in development? Yeah, well, usually IKs would be late in development. And the build that we played of the Guilty Gear Strive demo is essentially from 3 to 4 months before we played it. So I hope they eventually have IKs. I hope there's ways to actually combo into IK in maybe a different fashion than it was in the previous versions. It was actually pretty damn sick that you could combo into IK under really specific circumstances than what you could do in Guilty Gear Xrd. I hope that stuff stays, man. I mean, and I've said it before, right? I was having a conversation on Twitter about it because somebody was like, how has your stance changed on Guilty Gear changed over the course of Guilty Gear Strive? Why do you like the game now when your whole stance on fighting games in general has been not to neuter them, to not make them more quote unquote accessible through mechanics and stuff like that? I still stand by that completely, right? I still stand by completely that some mechanics in Guilty Gear in the past has been a little bit too... They go even a little bit too overboard in some ways, to the point where I think some of the mechanical redesign of the way the RC system works in Guilty Gear Strive is actually a pretty damn good idea. It's brilliant that they kept the old version in there. It's really smart that they kept this slow-mo thing, so if you want, like, you know, an assisted way of doing these combos, you can. But if you want a quicker, more integrated zip your ass in there, that shit still works. That's cool. It's also cool that they integrated certain things like the alpha counter kind of system that they had before. What was it? Blitz Shield? They turned that into yellow RC in many ways, but Blitz is still kind of way different. It's essentially like a focus attack. I kind of miss that stuff, but it was a good idea to consolidate a lot of things into Dead Angle. Sorry, Dead Angle. Wait a minute, Dead Angle and Blitz. Dead Angle is the alpha counter. You gotta forgive all the weird names that Guilty Gear isms have. Dead Angle is the alpha counter. Blitz Shield is the focus attack. I think I actually miss Blitz, right? I feel like I miss Blitz Shield. I think that thing was actually kind of cool. I think putting a lot of those things into the RC system is really smart, right? It actually expands the RC system, giving it more stuff that it can do, but then simplifying it, essentially making it accessible. That's where I feel like developers can find a middle ground in this accessibility argument. Granted, I understand where this dude was coming from, where he's like, why is your stance changed on Guilty Gear if you think this game is really fun and is obviously characters are neutered and more accessible than they ever have been? And why do you enjoy the game because of that? Great point. Good conversation. And the guy wasn't just trying to troll me or anything. Long story short, I think Xr's a better game. I do. I think Xrd is a more fun, faster-paced, kind of crazier game. I like YRC in some ways. I actually enjoy that. I think that's kind of I think it needed to be toned down in some ways. But if Guilty Gear Strive essentially kept a lot of the Gatling stuff, a lot of the mobility, a lot of the speed of Guilty Gear Xrd, and then changed their RC system into what it has now, I think that's a great balance of what they could do. I would much prefer characters to play like they do from Guilty Gear Xrd. Way prefer that. But here's the thing. Like I said, the RC system being consolidated into this one thing that takes a lot of things that was done before into this one mechanic, really smart. Good way of making things more accessible, but also adding an interesting level of depth that the previous games didn't have. But it doesn't change the fact that I would prefer the previous game, right? I'd prefer the previous game. Just trying to describe this in a way that makes sense. I think it's perspective, right? I think perspective is a big thing. I never put in a lot of time into a Guilty Gear game, probably since like X or XX, when they were offline. I got Guilty Gear Accent Core Plus R when it came out on Xbox 360, and the online was absolute dog shit. That I played 2 matches and I was like, done. And then I tried many times to get back into Guilty Gear Xrd, several times, to the point which I'm just like, I can't do this shit anymore, man. The netcode sucks. And it was one of the biggest deterring factors of me actually wanting to learn and get better at the game. It was the #1 thing. The biggest moment was me spending literally days practicing aggressively hard vanilla launch bike and combos, and then having to go to an online environment where the delay is jumping between 2 to 6 frames constantly, and having to pull off IAD tatami mat bike and combos. I was losing my fucking mind. I immediately switched back to Leo and it was like, oh Jesus, this is so much easier. Long story short, I don't have the perspective of grinding out the previous Guilty Gears a ton. The past like 10 years of Guilty Gear, I have not really grinded out those games to truly... Of course I know Xr's a great game. The bit I've played it is fucking amazing. But a lot of players that have grown up and have put years of experience into the Xrd series, as well as the Accent Core and games beyond, yada yada, there is no way you're going to make those players happy in a Strive situation in terms of core gameplay, right? Because simply put, it is just so much of everything has been toned down in many ways, and the RC system has been retuned, right? So for a lot of them, it's nice to see a lot of people enjoying Guilty Gear, but there's just no way you're going to make a lot of those guys happy, and we've been saying this for many years. The big difference is the fact that with my perspective, right? I don't just play Guilty Gear. A lot of Guilty Gear players like stick to one kind of game and one kind of genre, and they like play the shit out of that thing, right? And that's not the same with Guilty Gear. That's the same with almost any genre of fighting games. With my perspective of fighting games, the fact that we've played so many different ones over so many years, the past 5 to 6 years of fighting games has, in a lot of ways, has left me wanting more out of what the game is possible, like what you can do with the game, what is possible within the games and systems. Where it feels like a lot of developers, especially with 1v1 fighting games, have put a specific limitation on what you can do and what the characters are capable of, to the point where it just feels like, holy shit, why is everything in so much control? And by that account, the past 5 years of fighting games that have had 1v1 fighting games feel that way. Guilty Gear Strive is this wonderful, bountiful freedom, open field of insane ingenuity and mechanics and possibility at any given turn, right? Like, Guilty Gear Strive, by comparison to a lot of the fighting games that have existed that are 1v1 fighting games over the past many years, you have so much freedom of what the hell you can do. Everyone's playing characters dramatically different, you know? Nobody's doing everything the exact same. Every single person I ran into playing Nago was doing different shit, whether or not they were crazy offensive or crazy defensive or were managing blood gauge or any of that shit. The greatest part is that Guilty Gear keeps that. Strive is absolutely a neutered game in comparison to its previous iterations, but it keeps a little bit of the heart of Guilty Gear, which is the fact that a lot of characters, at least at this very, very early stage, feel like they have an ounce of individuality person to person. So that's cool. Like, that's actually one of the things I was the most worried about. And why am I confident that that's going to stay going forward? Because over the past few years, over the past almost 5 years of playing fighting games, it's immediately apparent when fighting games try to remove options from the player. When they really try to take away shit and boil it down to the absolute bone of what the game is. And Guilty Gear Strive does that to an extent, but not quite to the bone, to like a skin level. It's burning the skin level of what Guilty Gear is. It's like the top skin level is burned off, and now you got like the muscle, and that it's still Guilty Gear-esque, still Guilty Gear-esque, but not quite to the level of XR, not quite to the level of Guilty Gear Accent Core and stuff like that, Accent Core plus R, right? And it's fun. Like, my opinion hasn't changed. Would I prefer Guilty Gear to be the previous game and have carry on a lot of the mechanics and the way characters play from the previous game? 100%. Gatlings should come back still, in my opinion. But do I think the newest Guilty Gear is still a really enjoyable game where characters have a lot of crazy shit that they can do and gameplay mechanics and systems that allow you to get really creative with how you have to use that stuff? Yeah, it does. It still allows that shit. I like it. I like fighting games that make my ass make decisions constantly. And that's important, dude. I need there to be a lot of things that I can do at any given time. And all things considered, this is like, I'm going to throw some mad shade at the Guilty Gear Strive devs. I'm going to throw some mad shade. You guys aggressively tried to tone down your characters and core gameplay mechanics and really consolidate everything to the point where Arc System Works was willing to change the entire formula of Guilty Gear Strive to appeal towards a casual audience, an audience that might not have ever played Guilty Gear before. They were attempting to do that through mechanics. And you failed. Game is still too fast. Game still has too much shit going on. People are still genuinely confused by what the fuck is happening. But it looks pretty, and it plays really goddamn good online. Any new player that would have had an opportunity to go back to previous Guilty Gears when they were new and jumped into them would have had just as much enjoyment playing older Guilty Gears. However, there was big problems with the older Guilty Gears. The online was awful. Absolutely abhorrent shit. Once again, I don't think them putting all of this effort into the game to try to boil it down and remove things from characters and rewrite the way Guilty Gear works and do all this stuff, I don't think it really is having the effect that it essentially is, right? Like, if people were aware of Guilty Gear back when Xrd was first coming out, I'm gonna boil it down once again. The only reason there's more people interested in Guilty Gear right now is because another game existed and was popular, and it's called Dragon Ball FighterZ. If Dragon Ball FighterZ did not come out and sort of introduce everyone that Arc System Works is fucking dope, and they've been dope for a hell of a long time, and they've been doing all this shit for a hell of a long time, nobody would be paying attention to the degree at which they had been paying attention back in 2013, 2014 when Guilty Gear Xrd came out. But there was still a stifling factor of that game. The online sucked! It was still really fucking bad to play that game online. Now there's a mixture of everything, right? People are being introduced to Guilty Gear mechanics, not to the same degree and insanity that they were in the previous games, but they're still there. Characters are still doing insane and nutty stuff way more than even some Dragon Ball characters do, much less a lot of other 1v1 fighting games. Characters are crazy in this game. Things hurt. It's nuts. Game feels legit. This game feels legit like nutty by comparison to a lot of other fighting games, and its systems complement that. People are paying attention to the fact that now, damn, this looks even better than Dragon Ball FighterZ in many ways. Like, a lot of these things are building up to the fact that now more people are aware and playing Guilty Gear than there ever has in like the 20+ year history of the game's existence. Actually, maybe 22 years. And it's great. It's cool. And as a absolute casual Guilty Gear fan for a long time, and I've known about these games literally since their inception, it's great to see something eventually get to the point that it's at now, where a lot of people are paying attention. And guess what? The good word of mouth that came as a result of the online is making everybody play it. I think it's fine, right? I think it's fine. I think Guilty Gear is still a nutty game. I think there's still a lot of interesting stuff that's going to be discovered in the game. There's still a ton of shit that system mechanically is going to complement and just open up for. That's going to be ridiculous. We're only like touching the surface of what the RC system can do. People are barely even using the RC system in neutral at all. So way, is that a bad thing? I don't think they should have gone to the degrees that they did. You know, I don't think they should have gone to the degrees they did of changing as much as they possibly could about, you know, the core game and everything like that. I think Guilty Gear in 2021, even if they kept Gatlings, even if they kept a lot of the characters having a lot of the nutty stuff they have, and they made it look as good as it does and play as good as it does online, would have been getting just as much attention. As long as it was different, right? The important thing is that Guilty Gear's changing more than it ever has. And what they've essentially tried to do is remove as much legacy skill as possible. So even from Xrd, there was a lot of legacy skill that carried over from Xrd when you went into, from Accent Core Plus R when you went into Xrd. There's a bit of a reset, right? A bit, not much. You give people that are veteran players of any fighting game, they're gonna figure shit out within a day or two, and they're gonna feel like they've been playing the game for years. Absolutely. But that's important, right? It's important for a new fighting game to satiate both audiences and give you an element of discovery. Gatling's the old combo system that Guilty Gear had, where it allowed you to go from any attack to roll up, right? Power up from punch to kick to slash to heavy slash. Now you can't do that as much. Now there's very specific limitations on what the combo string system can be. Yeah, I think the one thing in Guilty Gear right now that is probably the most beginner friendly, is damage. 100% damage. The fact that you can just go from slash to heavy slash, and it does as much damage as it does, That is the one thing that absolutely screams to me how new player friendly they're trying to be, you know? But it's also having a reverse effect on some characters, right? Characters that have less health. It's de-incentivizing their play style in the hands of new players. So characters like Chip, Milia, stuff like that, they're getting hit, man. It's interesting, right? It's fucking, to me, it's interesting. And the game is still enjoyable. It's still fun. I really like the fact that I had to relearn how Leo works, right? Do I miss a lot of the shit he had? I miss Rekka's. I miss his bring you back down to the ground to neutral, move in the air. I miss that shit, man. But was I still having a shit ton of fun making all these rapid fire decisions with the character and still playing him a bit different than I did before? Yeah. And that's enough for me. It's actually enough for me. He's still nutty, you know? He's probably not as gorilla-esque as he was in the previous game. I don't think he is. But he's still really fun. And that's all I can ask for, is that there's still a lot of new weird shit that I have to figure out with the RC system with him. I've already seen combos that I'm like, I'm not even doing that shit. Wow. Do that instead. Long story short, and to summarize all this, the question was, why is the accessibility changes of Guilty Gear Strive okay to you now when I have a history of not being okay with accessibility in fighting games, specifically when it comes to characters and mechanics? And I think characters and mechanics should have more tools. Give them more tools. I think XR largely is a better fighting game than Guilty Gear Strive. But the combination of popularity from post-Dragon Ball Fighters, the fact that the game looks so good and plays so good online, and in comparison to many of the other fighting games that existed over the past 5 years where they try to tone things down almost too much, in my personal opinion, Guilty Gear, in comparison to those games, is an absolute batshit insane fighting game. And it goes to show you how absolutely batshit insane Xrd was in all of its iterations, and how absolutely fucking ridiculously insane a game like Accent Core Plus R is, now that you actually get to play it, you know, with good online. It goes back to show you how absolutely fucking nuts this shit was when it was in the height of its popularity in like the early 2010s. So, yeah, perspective is going to suck a lot for Guilty Gear fans. Absolutely. I don't blame you guys for being pissed. Absolutely at all. But for me personally, I'm glad that there's a crazy fighting game still. I'm glad the Guilty Gear characters can still fucking double jump and shit. I'm glad that there's still some characters that are allowed to air dash, right? Like, thank God. Because it's a vanilla version of a fighting game. Shit's gonna change. Characters are gonna get more tools. And eventually Naga is going to be able to air dash or some shit, right? Eventually they're gonna give him some more stuff that he can do. So, I think that's eventually gonna happen. And when the game's at that point, I think even classic Guilty Gear fans are going to have some more enjoyment out of Guilty Gear Strive than they might have had in the beta. I don't know how much y'all remember Guilty Gear Xrd was when it came out. Xrd Sign. That is a much, much, much different game than Rev 1 or even Rev 2. Much different. Vanilla versions of fighting games are going to change dramatically over the years. Everyone's all up in arms about the gameplay of Guilty Gear, you know, which is great, because we don't have to worry about the online anymore. Thank God. You just got to worry about the lobby. Got to worry about the crossplay. And now we just have to hope that the new characters they add are going to be genuinely interesting and entertaining, and that all the stuff that they add in the future, when the game eventually does get expanded, is going to be fun and enjoyable. And I'm pretty sure it is. Arxis makes some fun fighting.